The design for Western Sydney's new international airport is finally out, and the Minister for Population, Alan Tudge, was there to announce it this morning. The airport is part of the federal government's population plan, and the Minister joins me now. Welcome, Alan Tudge.
G'day, Shari.
So the photographs look pretty flash. It looks amazing. Can you tell us about, what Western Sydney Airport will finally look like and why you chose this design out of so many that pitched for this very lucrative contract?
Yeah, well, that's right. So we announced today the initial designs for the terminal, and it is looking terrific. It's going to be a really modern, open, light terminal. It'll be at the cutting edge in terms of technology, so there'll be seamless passenger flow through the terminal, and it will be open in 2026, and that's when airlines will be taking off from Western Sydney Airport, both domestic airlines and international ones. So a really exciting development along the way today where we announced this. This is a great jobs generator as well, because as we're building this airport, it's 11,000 jobs being constructed. There'll be 28,000 jobs being supported during the operational phase of the airport. So exciting times in Western Sydney.
It's amazing that this has been under debate and discussion and argument for decades, and then finally there's an opening date, if your construction runs according to schedule, which nothing ever does, but of 2026, which is amazing. Tell me, is there going to be enough parking? Because that's the big problem with Sydney Airport at the moment. You know, it's the main international airport for Australia, and people can't get to it and they can't get away from it.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of issues with the Kingston Smith Airport. One is that it's getting close to capacity, despite the fact that we're going to have a lot more growth. Second is that it's not a 24-hour airport. As you know, there's a curfew at the Sydney Airport presently, and it's only one of two airports in Australia that has a curfew, the other being Adelaide. But the third is there's been car parking constraints. Now, all of those issues will be addressed with the Western Sydney Airport when it opens in 2026. It's on track at the moment. It's on budget. We fully expect it to open at the end of 2026 with budget airlines, with premium airlines, with international airlines, all taking off in that particular year. And by having that additional airport in Sydney as well, it actually does create some competitive pressures too across the two airports. Now, that puts downward pressure on prices for the airports and hence the airlines, and that will inevitably flow through to ticket prices as well.
But with your new design that you've released today, have you factored in a lot of parking for Western Sydney?
So there will be parking for the Western Sydney Airport as well, but by 2026, who knows how people are going to be travelling to the airport. We're ensuring that there's going to be a train connection to the airport right from day one. That's a really important commitment which we have made, and we've already got $3.5 billion allocated towards that. But there's also going to be freeway connection to the airport as well. Of course, people will be parking there.
Well, it's actually an interesting point when you say who knows how people are going to be travelling to the airport. Probably not in 2026, but beyond the next decade, there are a lot of, well, every car company almost is coming out with driverless cars. You as the infrastructure minister, when you plan ahead for cities and give funding for major projects to be built, are you factoring this into your thinking at all, the direction of driverless cars?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of work going on in relation to driverless vehicles at the Transport Ministers Forum, and so there's a lot of thinking in relation to that, but no one really knows how quickly it will evolve. Now, I'm actually quite excited by the prospect of driverless vehicles, in part because I think it will help address some of the congestion challenges in our cities. Some estimates are that it could reduce the avoidable congestion by up to 25 or 30%, which is an enormous amount. But they're estimates. We don't know when it will come in. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles to overcome, and there's still a lot of safety standards that need to be overcome as well. But I think it will be inevitable at some stage in the future that we'll see driverless vehicles. The question is when. That's when we don't know.
Are you already working on some of those hurdles? I mean, I find it interesting that it was just raised at a conference. I didn't know people were already, it was on the agenda at discussions with your state counterparts.
Yeah, so there already is through the Transport Ministers Forum, and there's a task force set up which is looking at these questions. There's an estimated something like 700 regulations which have to be overcome for a driverless vehicle to be able to actually operate in Australia. And of course, you want to make sure as well that there's consistency across jurisdictions for whatever new rules you might put in place, including what sort of lines or nanoparticles in the bitumen that you might be putting in the future to cater for driverless vehicles. We don't want to have another rail gauge problem across the states, so that's another critical component, is ensuring that we have uniform regulations.
Now, just on the drought and on drought infrastructure, Alan Jones has written quite a good piece, a very strong piece in The Telegraph today, where he talks about how the Australian government built a pipeline from Australia to PNG to carry gas. Also, as we know, we're funding undersea internet cables to Solomon Islands in PNG, but he says that there's been no adequate water infrastructure built in Australia. You, as the infrastructure minister, do you think it's shameful that not enough has been done when we know Australia suffers drought to help protect farmers when this inevitably will occur?
Well, I disagree with his assessment. I mean, there's an enormous amount of water infrastructure which is being put in place as we speak. I can't remember the exact number and I don't look after that part of the portfolio. But we are very serious about this. Obviously, the states and territories have the primary responsibility for looking after the water infrastructure, but we are supporting them very strongly as well. And that's just one element of our overall package in supporting, in tackling the drought. We've obviously got a package which supports individuals who are suffering, particularly through the Farmers Household Allowance, which we've increased to 4 years. We've got packages which are for communities, because broader communities get affected, not just farmers. And of course, we've also got a fund which deals with the drought, and that incorporates things like water infrastructure as well.
What other infrastructure projects do you think should be funded and built right now so that in the future farmers don't suffer like they are today?
That's not really in my portfolio, that particular question. I know that's being worked through
but you're in Cabinet.
by state and territory ministers.
This is a discussion that Cabinet's looking at it and talking about, this is a live issue.
Sure, but we've got a lot of water infrastructure projects which we are already contributing to. There's been a lot of work being done on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, as you probably know. We're providing direct assistance to farmers who are really struggling with the drought, and that work is ongoing, and there may well be more to come. But as I said, I'll leave the details up to the responsible ministers in relation to that.
Have you just signed off on extra drought funding at Cabinet?
Sorry, say that again,
I
Sherry.
said, have you just signed off on extra drought funding at Cabinet as the government?
Well, we've been announcing extra drought funding as we've been going along over the last few months, as you probably know. So, and that includes the $5 billion future fund, effectively, knowing that droughts are going to be a common feature in the future, as they have been in the past.
Look, you've got a big population task force and review that you've set up. Not long ago, there were quite strong calls to reduce the population. Now that the economy there are more concerns about the economy and the budget position as well. Is this now on the back burner? I mean, any move to reduce the population would threaten our budget position.
Oh, well, Sherry, our position hasn't changed markedly since we first announced our population plan. So the key components are to reduce the permanent migration rate from what was 190,000 to a cap of 160,000. And then within that, to allocate a dedicated number of positions, 25,000, specifically for the regional areas.
But is this now such a good idea to reduce that cap from 190 to 160 when there are concerns about our economy?
Well, the fundamental issue is that we've got so much growth going into Melbourne, Sydney and South East Queensland, but we don't have much growth going into other parts of Australia. And so part of our plan is to ease the population pressures off those big capital cities, which are really feeling the squeeze. I mean, people of Sydney, people of Melbourne know that because they have been growing so fast. And yet there's other parts of Australia, such as Adelaide or Perth or some of the regional areas, which actually want more people. They're often crying out for skills which they can't get. They've got vacancies which they can't fill. So our plan is really to take some of the population pressures off the big capital cities, but also support the aspirations for further growth in those smaller cities and the regional areas.
Look, you've announced about 160-odd infrastructure projects to bring forward to help stimulate the economy. How many jobs exactly will these projects create?
Well, we've got about 130 major projects underway which we are funding. and that supports well over 50,000 jobs through those particular projects. So it's an enormous amount of work which is going on, a record amount, and we've got a pipeline of work over the next decade as well. Now, of course, on top of that, we've got 166 smaller scale projects in the suburbs, which we want to get cracking on as soon as possible, because they often support the smaller scale contractors in the suburbs of our big cities.
And how many jobs
and
do
don't
you
put as much pressure on the tier 1 and tier 2 contractors. So, listen, I don't have an estimate for that. We get those estimates as we go through the process with the states and territories, because they provide the details for how they will actually implement them and how many jobs will be created in the process.
Minister, just lastly, Jeff Kennett today said politicians have no vision today, unlike when he was Premier. What's your vision for Australia?
Well, I know Jeff Kennett has been saying that ever since that he left office, but I mean, we want to see a large, prosperous Australia where everybody can fulfil their potential, where families can thrive, they can work hard and be rewarded for it, where our environment is clean, and where we've got every opportunity under the sun for individuals today and for future generations.